We are in our 5th week, and I think even this week I can remember all of the people we have talked about. Hopefully you can. Father Abraham, Moses, Joshua. Last week we talked about a not so well-known guy by the name of Mephibosheth. And this week we're going to talk about Gideon. And all of the Midianites, I call them the Ite people, the I-T-E people. I'm from Kentucky. That often comes out as Ite. I don't know if you all can understand that language or not. But Gideon, along with the rest of Israel, was hiding out. You see, the Israelites had again turned away from the God who had delivered them time and time again, who had said to you, "You are my chosen people, and I'm going to make a great nation out of you." They had again turned away. And we're told that the Ite people, the people of the east, they ravaged and impoverished the land of Israel. We're told in Judges that the number of people and the number of camels and livestock that they brought into the land of Israel were too numerous to count. It's described as locusts swarming the land, and they left nothing alive in their wake. All of the Israelites' livestock would be slaughtered every time that these Ite people would invade Israel. So Israel fled. It's a very mountainous region, and they fled to the caves and hid in the clefts of the mountains. And so, like us, with no other hope, they did what? They finally cried out to God. And so God sent them a prophet. We're not told the prophet's name, but the prophet told them the truth. That's what prophets do. They tell the truth as God has informed them. And to paraphrase, he shows up and he says, "God's been good to you people. Yet you continue to chase after other gods and other idols, and so you didn't learn. When God removed his hand of protection from you, and Egypt invaded you and took you off into captivity, and you lived in Egypt for generations in captivity as slaves. But God was faithful, and he brought you out of Egypt, and he provided for you the 40 years in the desert that Moses led you. And Joshua led you over into the promised land, and he gave you this land. But he said, be faithful to me. I'm a jealous God. Don't chase after other gods in this land." And yet again you disobeyed. And so Yahweh, the great God, he removed his hand of protection from you yet again. And all these people are taking advantage of your weak state. See, God does the same for us, doesn't he? Like Israelites, whenever we experience the consequences of our actions, as a last resort, most often, we cry out to God and we say, "Why have you forsaken us, God? You promised that you would always be with us." And if we're listening, most of the time we want to do all the talking to God. If we're listening, the reply we usually get is, "I never left you. You left me." That's basically what he was saying to Israel. I've been faithful to you. I've never left you, but you left me. And so the angel of God appears to Gideon because God's merciful, and he heard the cries of his people yet again. And the angel of the Lord says to Gideon, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Mighty warrior. See, Gideon didn't see himself as a mighty warrior. And he told the angel, he said, "I am the weakest among the weak. I'm the runt of the litter. Nobody listens to me. And my clan, my tribe of people, we are looked upon as the weakest among all the tribes of Israel. Why would anyone follow me?" But see, God saw Gideon as what he could become, not as who he was right then and there. And he does the same for us. He sees what we can become with his help, not as we truly are. So Gideon questions the angel of the Lord. And he says, if you're with us, if you're with me, why has all this happened to us? As if the prophet's words didn't ring in his ear. He's having a conversation with the angel of the Lord. And basically the angel says, don't point fingers. You need to take responsibility for your part of this mess. Don't blame God. You all left God. You all chased after these other gods. Now he says, go and save Israel. Am I not sending you? And Gideon, but, I'm the weakest, I'm the runt, no one's going to listen to me. Are you sure you've chosen correctly? Are you talking to me, or am I just overhearing a conversation that you have for someone that's much more qualified? God, I think you may have made a mistake. And the angel of the Lord says, I'll be with you, and we will do this together. And so Gideon says, wait. If this is the Lord, I seem to remember that we are to offer sacrifices to God in whenever a moment of truth like this happens. So hang on. And so he goes and gets a goat and some broth, and he brings it and he sacrifices it before the Lord. And the angel of the Lord took Gideon's staff and he touched it. And it was consumed by fire. And Gideon realized, as if a conversation with the angel of the Lord wasn't enough, he realized this is God. And fear struck him because he had been told all his life, if you lay eyes upon the Lord, if you talk to the Lord, you'll surely die because the Lord is all powerful. And I'm not worthy. And the angel said, my peace rest upon you. Now I've got big things for you to do. And the first thing I want you to do is I want you to take down that altar that your tribe has built to Baal. And that Asherah pole, which represents your faithfulness to other gods, I want you to take that down too. And I want you to build a proper altar to me in the middle of your tribe and sacrifice a bull. So Gideon, in the power of the Lord, with all his confidence, he waited until nightfall when everyone was asleep. And he went and he tore down the altar. And he tore down the Asherah pole. And he sacrificed a bull. And when the men of the village awoke the next day, they came to Gideon's father and they said, we understand your son has done this. And we're going to kill him because he has torn down our altar to Baal. And Gideon's father said, if he is God and you do worship Baal, can he not take care of himself? Is he not big enough to strike my son down himself? Why do you all have to do Baal's work? Besides, is that really the God we're supposed to be worshiping? You see, sometimes whenever we're called to do the right thing, it's not popular. And Gideon, by all means, was not popular. And his tribe was condemning him. And Gideon's got to be thinking at this point, so I'm supposed to rally these troops, God, and the first thing you've had me do is offend every single one in my tribe. Sounds like a good plan. And so Gideon calls the men of the tribe together, and as they're assembling, in his great confidence, because God's told him, I'm with you, mighty warrior, Gideon says, are you sure that you're talking to me? God, don't be angry with me, but I want to make sure and certain that this is all going to turn out okay. Just pacify me. I'm going to take this sheep's fleece, and I'm going to lay it on the floor tonight, God. And if you are really calling me to do this, in the morning, whenever I wake up, God, all the ground around the fleece will be dry, and the fleece will be soaking wet with dew. If you're really talking to me, God. And so I guess in his patience and his mercy, Gideon woke up the next morning and God had done just that. And he wrung out a bowl full of water from the fleece, and it was all dry around it. And so you would think that Gideon got the picture at this point. He said, God, be patient with me, God. I'm still not 100% sure that you got the right guy. How about tomorrow morning we take that same fleece? I'm guessing God's getting impatient at this point. I would have struck him down at this point. Lucky I'm not God. But he says, how about I take the same fleece, and tomorrow morning the fleece will be dry, and all the ground around it will be wet with dew. So Gideon wakes up the next morning, and that exact same thing that he had requested of God happened. The fleece was dry, and all the ground around it was wet. Fortunately for Gideon, God indulged his little test, because God's actions aren't always what we would consider rational or just, and God doesn't always act as we would. He's much more merciful and patient with us often than we give him credit for. So 32,000 warriors assemble. And God says, I think you've got too many men, Gideon. What? I think you've got too many men, Gideon. Really, God? Their warriors are too many for us to count. I don't think our small army of 32,000 is too many. And God says, yep, it's too many. You self-centered people are going to boast and brag about all that you were able to do if I deliver these ite people into your hands and give you the victory. What I want you to do is tell these people, all of you who tremble in fear, who are afraid to fight, I want you to go home. Magically, the number was cut from 32,000 down to 10,000. It seemed that 22,000, or 1/3 of the army, was afraid that God could not deliver once again. Oh, you of little faith. And so Gideon's thinking, 10,000 against too many to count. And God says, I think you've still got too many, Gideon. Really? Yeah, I think you've got too many. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell them to get a drink from this river. Because again, God's not always rational, right? I want you to tell them to get a drink from this river. And I want you to divide them up. Some of them are going to bend down and they're going to lap like dogs directly from this river. And then others are going to bend down and they're going to take their hands and they're going to cup it and they're going to drink the water. Divide them up by the way they do that. Why? I don't know. But that's what God wanted them to do, so that's what Gideon did. And 9,700 men lapped like dogs, and 300 drank with their hands. And which group do you think God chose to fight the battle? Gideon wound up with 300 men to fight an army that's too numerous to count. Because God said, you all will brag and think you did it, and not me. He was saying, your strength comes from me, Gideon, and I'm an all-powerful God. Gideon, at this point, you would think he would be certain and sure, right? But he wasn't. So God, in his mercy and grace, he said, all right, go on a little scouting mission into this camp of these Midianites and see what you hear. And so Gideon snuck into the camp, and he heard two soldiers talking. And one was telling the other soldier about a dream he had of this great loaf of bread or whatever rolling into their camp and totally destroying everything in its path. And that soldier said, you know what that means? It means that Gideon and that great army that's assembled over the hill, their God is mighty, and he is going to deliver us into their hands, and we might as well not get out now while the getting's good. Gideon, at that point, we're told in Scripture, bowed down and worshiped God right then and there. Because he realized, if God is with me, who can be against me? And it's in his power that this will happen. And my God is able. And he's called me a mighty warrior. And so the attack plan that God gave Gideon was pretty simple. You know, assemble all your armor and all that sort of stuff. But lay down your weapons, because your weapons are going to be a trumpet and a clay jar. See, I believe that God wanted the Israelites to know that your weapons are no match for me. And there's no way you can brag on how mighty you are. You'll give all the glory to me. And maybe, just maybe, you'll turn your hearts back to me. And so the 300 men stood up on the mountainside and surrounded the camp. And with a loud hurrah, they blew the trumpets as loud as they could, 300 trumpets. And they crushed the clay jars, and it sounded like mighty chariots coming into the valley. And they shouted, "A sword for God and a sword for Gideon." And chaos ensued among all the Midianite people. And the mighty warriors of the Midianites could not tell who was with them and who was against them. And they fought each other. And there was only a small group that survived, and Gideon tracked them down. See, I think what God is telling us through this story, if sometimes we'll just get out of the way, God will take care of us. Sometimes we're so busy fixing and doing things in our own power that we don't let God work in our lives and take care of us. And then whenever God does work in our lives and take care of us, like some of these Israelites, I'm sure we say, look at what I did. I'm real proud of myself now. See, God acted, and the people still tried to give Gideon the credit because he was the leader. And they wanted to make him their king. But as leaders, they're called to be humble and give credit where credit's due. It starts with the small things, and it builds. And I think that's what we're called to do. We're called to be leaders in our world. We're called to be a light in our world. And Jesus, in John 14, before he was going to go away, he said, "I've been doing all these things, and I've taught you my disciples, but I'm going to leave, and you're going to do greater things than these. And you're going to pray to me, and you're going to ask for these things in my name. And guess what? I'm going to listen. And if your heart's in line with God's, I'm going to answer. And I'm going to give you all these things." What things was he talking about we were supposed to do? We're supposed to care for widows and orphans, the least among us. We're supposed to love our neighbors. We're supposed to meet the physical needs of the least of those around us. Give them a drink of cold water, food whenever they're hungry, and visit them whenever they're sick or in prison. It's not rocket science. We're supposed to, by the way we live our lives, introduce them to the one true God, the God that Israel seemed to neglect over and over and over again. We're supposed to introduce them to the God who will take their broken state, just like he did us, and make them whole. Because we can't fix them. Try as we may. We should see ourselves as mighty warriors, not as the weak among the weakest that, unfortunately, I think the church often finds itself in today. We don't want to offend anyone by telling them about our God or giving God praise and thanksgiving for what he does in our lives. Don't hear this as a political sermon. Some of us automatically think that way. But many within church leadership and within power and within our community, they've convinced us that sharing your faith is not a good thing. Don't listen to them. Do you know the fastest growing religious group in the United States is a group called Other? Other means people who do not identify themselves as having any faith at all. We're not called to be confrontational and beat people over the head with the Bible. We're called to love them. And perhaps we've been fairly or unfairly labeled as people who don't love our neighbors. I don't know. And I'm against a lot of things, cruelty and harm and robbery and thievery, and the list goes on and on. But I don't think we need to be known for what we stand against. God's called us mighty warriors. We're to be known for what we stand for, and that's love and humility and servanthood and peace. But also we're to be known for our obedience to God and our discipline and our faithfulness and our loyalty and our morality. Grace covers over our bad behavior of sin and our lack of loving our neighbor and the things we don't do. And we always like to hear about the grace of God, but we always have to remember that that's always tempered with truth, which calls us to be obedient to the teachings of God, and calls us to be faithful to God, and calls us to live holy and moral lives and love our neighbors. They always ask Jesus, who's my neighbor? And he would always point out, whoever's in front of you. We're called to live out our faith in the world, and we're mighty warriors. We're not the weakest among the weak who should be hiding out in caves. And I'll tell you, it's countercultural to bring peace and love into our world, because that's just not the world we live in. Turn on the news, you know. You can see there's trouble in Gaza. Well, if you read our scripture, there was trouble in Gaza 3,000 years ago. And there's always been trouble in Gaza. In our world today, we have our own Gaza. I want to share with you, and I'll close with this. It's a Helen Keller quote, and I love it. It says, "I'm only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." Sometimes the need's so great that we get overwhelmed that we say, I can't do anything. I'm just the weakest among the weak. I'm not a mighty warrior. But we can do something. So I would encourage you to find out what the something is that you can do. Talk to this person. Befriend this person. Help this person. Forgive that person. And then for us as a church, what is the something or somethings that God is calling us to do? And I would tell you that if our dream or our purpose is so small that we don't need God's help to do it, then our dream or our purpose is too small. God has called us mighty warriors, and He says, am I not sending you?